So welcome. And I was thinking about what the topic would be. I mean, always the week before one of these meetings, you understand this, Jamie. And what am I going to talk about? And you'll come up with one idea, and a couple of days later it'll change, right? And you'll throw away everything you did for the one, which I did yesterday. Uh, and and I realized what I wanted to talk about was that when we get to those of you who have taken the course more recently know that week 5 is the hard week. That's a week where you start turning towards something difficult. It used to be week 7. I probably should put it back in week 7 because it is a difficult week because it's for the first time you're starting to pay attention to, rather than normal meditation. If it's a breath meditation or a body scan, when your mind wanders, you start obsessing about something that's difficult, you just gently and firmly bring it back. And I realized that what's tricky about week 5 is the how. How do you do this? Because most of us only have 2 ways of dealing with difficulty. One is to plunge into it and get wrapped up in it and just get upset and anxious about what's not working right, or we distract ourselves with food or whatever, or getting busy or doing something else. And this is a very different way of dealing with something that's difficult. And as I thought about it, I realized that most of what I brought to this part of the course, a lot of it is informed by what I learned about focusing. Something that was originated by Gene Genlin, who's actually a philosopher by trade. That's what his PhD is in, although he got into psychotherapy after he started working with Carl Rogers. And Ann Weiser Cornell, who's a linguist by trade, have put together a form of focusing that I really love. And a lot of my training comes from Ann Weiser Cornell. So you have a psychologist and a philosopher and a linguist who in almost equal parts have put together what's the focusing. And it's way more complex than we could do in an evening, and way more complex than you could even do in a week of MBSR. And that's why I don't try to teach it, but there's one part of it, one aspect, one step that she has that is so simple and so powerful. I just wanted to share that with you. And that's actually in that I didn't pick up the handouts, but the handout has in it that one step, and that's called something in me. So when we think of something that's bothering us or something that's going on, say I'm angry or I'm anxious or I'm mad or I'm sad, there's a problem with how we've characterized it, and I'll say more about that later. And in phrasing it differently, saying something in me is angry or mad or sad, completely transforms that. And so that's the focus of what I wanted to share with you tonight. And I found a video that I'd kind of lost track of that is her being interviewed by somebody where she describes just this part of it. She describes the whole focusing process, but specifically that part. And it's so powerful. It's really about, as she describes in the video, about empathy. And as I was looking back, I also reminded myself of how this whole focusing came about, and it's just so fascinating. It was Carl Rogers and Gene Genlin together who did a study, which is a very ambitious study. For 2.5 years, they studied 48 patients, 48 subjects, 24 of which were going to be in therapy with 8 therapists, each of the 8 therapists with 3 people. 24 people were controls, didn't have any therapy, and each of the clients had 200 hours, about 200 hours of therapy over the 2.5 years. They recorded everything, every single session, for every single subject, every single client, and with in mind that they were going to learn what it is the therapists were doing that was effective, and which therapies were most effective. That's what Carl and Gene Genlin wanted to study. And they got all this material after 2.5 years. They studied these. I mean, it was very intense. They every month or every 3 months, they had somebody come in and do 6 different assessments for each of the people, each of the subjects. One was a Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, which was common in those times. Another one was Rorschach, which is not so much in use now, but this is like the 60s, and 4 others, and tracked them in their progress over the 2.5 years. And out of the 2.5 years, they said these were the clients that progressed most the best, who really improved. So what happened in those therapies? And so they went through, listened to all these audio tapes, trying to find out what the therapist did and what the therapies were working, and they couldn't figure it out. There was nothing common about, it wasn't one therapist that was having all the success. It wasn't one kind of therapy that was having all the success. But rather than listening to the therapist, they started listening to the clients. And that was the key. Is that when the client expressed what they're noticing themselves, what their reflection of what was happening, when they expressed it in a certain way, then from that very first session, you could predict that at the end of 2.5 years, it was going to be successful. If they didn't do it, it wasn't going to be successful. No matter what the therapist did, no matter what the therapy was, that was the one commonality. It was so, once they distinguished that that's what it was, that they were listening to themselves in that certain way.
What was it, Dave?
So what it was what Gene Gendlin called them searching for their felt sense. So if the client says, "Oh, I'm really mad, and here's why I'm mad, and it goes back to my childhood, blah, 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 blah," no effect. That wasn't going to be helpful. But if they said something like, I just feel really sad, and I don't know, maybe it's not so much sad, but it's like I'm actually a little bit mad, and I no, it's kind of, it's like this sinking feeling in my stomach. It's like, no, it's disappointment. It's disappointment. That's what it is. If they did that kind of exploration, the therapy was going to be successful. Yeah, it's what Gendlin called the felt sense. If they tied into it wasn't always with body sensation, but often it was. If they did that, it was going to be successful. And yeah. Well, on these 6 metrics, the 6 assessments they did, the Minnesota multiphasic and the Rorschach test and everything, they test them every 3 months for those 2.5 years. So if they showed progress, they said that was success on those. They didn't quite know what to do with this because it wasn't the therapies, it wasn't the therapists. It was this thing the clients were doing. And in the way Gendlin describes it, he says they kind of throw their hands up at one point and say, well, I guess what we have to do is just take the ones that are going to be successful, and I don't know what we do with the other ones. But Gendlin wasn't too happy with that answer. And he says, this must be teachable. There must be a way to teach this. And so that's how focusing was born. He developed a process in which this could be taught, where people could get in touch with what was going on internally and express it in a way where there is not just a noticing what was happening internally, but also, and this is where Ann Weiser Cornell comes in, because her background is as a linguist, the languaging was important, because what the term that they used, it was important that it matched the feeling they were having, whether it's physical or an emotional kind of feeling. And when there was a match, some kind of a shift would happen, just in noticing that. The language that Ann Weiser Cornell came up with was to say, first not say I am, but say something in me, but also to say it in this way. So what if you said it in this way? I'm sensing something in me is angry. I'm sensing something in me is angry. That's a whole different sense than I am angry. Because I am angry is solid. It's not going to change. This is how it is. But I'm sensing something in me is angry. All of a sudden, it makes you bigger than the anger. You're no longer the anger. There's anger happening. No blame. Right.
It's also not about the answer. It's about the search.
Right.
It's about the looking. It's about the looking.
Yeah.
And asking what is going on, as opposed to I have the answer about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that sense of, it isn't just that you distance yourself from it. Some forms of meditation are like that. It is going away from what's bothering you, going away from all the things that are turning inside, and having a sense of distance and peace away from that. But this is a combination of being bigger than what's going on, but also paying attention. That's what was really unique about it. It's not distancing yourself. It's not getting in the weeds with it, but it is very intimate in a way. There's an experiment I share sometimes about. There's one of the monks that Richie Davidson study at University of Wisconsin. It's like the one that was had the most experience, 50,000 hours of meditation experience and over 30 years. And you do the arithmetic, that's 3 hours a day, every day for 30 years. Not your average person. And when he studied him, his fMRI looked very different than the average person's. And one of the things he wanted to understand is it that this guy, Matthew Ricard is his name, he was trained as a what was it called, genetic, I think maybe biological genetics or molecular genetics in Institute of Paris in France. He had a PhD and went to a Tibetan monastery in Tibet. His father and nobody else really understood what he did. He says, these are the happiest people I've ever met. I want to find out why that is. And he's known as the happiest person on earth, which he doesn't really like that term very much because he thinks it's unfair to characterize him in that one, but his brain was very different. So Richard Davidson wanted us to understand, is it because he was a born meditator and he just gravitated toward that, or could it be trained? And the conclusion was it can be trained, and that's and the first study that Davidson did was with MBSR, the 8-week course. Do the same fMRI or the same tests and see if there was some switch from that he saw happen in an extreme sense in Matthew Ricard's case. And I started all of that because Matthew Ricard, there was a psychologist, Paul Ekman in California, wanted to study him. Here's this guy who's meditated for all these hours, and he wanted to test him because he had a feeling that his stress response would be very different than the average person. And he hooked him up with all kinds of sensing devices, including EEG and galvanic skin response, and subjected him to a startle response test, which is a loud sound. It's like a gunshot, and to see what his response would be, and measured Matthew Ricard's response. And his response, he had a response, but his response was so low, it was thought before that test that it was not medically possible to have a response that was that low. So how I got there was what you said about getting bigger than that. Because when Paul Ekman asked him about this, well, how did you do that? Expecting he was going to say, well, I got really, really concentrated and I really focused and I really zeroed in. He said, no, it wasn't like, it was the opposite. He said, I made myself really big. I imagined I was as big as the universe. And then that shot was just a little sound in the universe.
So did he do that before the sound came, or
I think he was told it was going to happen.
Okay.
So he did do that before.
Prepared.
Yeah, so he's prepared. I found this video I want to share with you of Ann Weiser Cornell talking about this. But this is actually an interview of hers about empathy. But as she describes it in the video, you'll see that empathy is a key part of doing a focusing process, because you're not pushing away, you're paying attention, but in a way that's especially with yourself. Yeah. So let me see if I can set this up.
As I understood it, Gene Gendlin was a grad student with Carl Rogers and became, I would say, really a colleague and built on his work, and Carl Rogers would reference him. And I see focusing as a real next step on top of Carl Rogers' work. So I want to just dialogue with you about empathy and focusing.
So one of the things Gendlin is famous for saying is every bad feeling is potential energy for a more right way of being if you give it space. Even feelings that we're having that are unpleasant, uneasy, fearful, or even very depressed or down, contain a kind of knowing of what would be needed, what would be the right next step.
Oh, I see. So it's that even if you're in pain, if you're feeling angry, or you have different types of anxiety or fear, that underneath that is sort of a next step or a knowing of what the solution would be to address that. So it's almost as if that that problem feeling or that pain is like a source of its own resolution, in a sense, underneath it.
That's right. That's,
Okay.
that's right. That's what I'm saying, and that's what we found. And so it's very interesting to really live that way, because in general, the culture in general tries to push away negative feelings, to control them, to, you know, handle or manage them somehow. And yet it turns out that if you turn toward them with a quality of inner empathy, like, hello, I'd like to get to know you better, there are steps of change that emerge. We kind of speak in general in the common culture about our feelings as if they're kind of unchangeable. You know, I have this fear of public speaking, or I have this anger at my brother, and as if it's some kind of piece of furniture that's always going to be there. But the word emotion points to the fact that every emotion is on its way to being something else. And yet we do experience emotions recurring in certain situations over and over again. So why is that? I believe it's because we're treating the emotions as if they're unchangeable. Now, you didn't mention in your introduction of me that my degree is in linguistics. I bring the study of language to the work I do in emotional healing. I call it the art of facilitative language. And one of the things I try to remind people, watch out for nouns. Notice the difference between my fear, okay, fear is a noun, and so just the fact that it's a noun makes it seem kind of unchangeable. What if we say instead, afraid? And I would add a little more language to that, and I would say something in me is afraid right now. And now we have a very different attitude toward what we're feeling than if we say, it's my fear.
So you're creating more of a space around it. It's like not this, I am this thing and it's fixed. It's that it's this I'm afraid, and it's this quality within me, and there's more space around it in that
That's
sense.
Right. And in that exactly. And in that space, what has become now possible is curiosity. By the way, curiosity and empathy go together very well, don't they? And I think curiosity is another very powerful force. If someone is attacking me verbally or is somehow holding a fixed position that I just can't understand, probably the first step I'm going to need in order to empathize with that person is to get curious, is to say to myself, there must be some good reason why that person thinks that's so important. I wonder what it is. Let me see if I can understand. So in my work, which is moving on a little bit from Gendlin, it's called inner relationship focusing. And so I especially emphasize that there's a relationship inwardly between the person as a whole self, I call self in presence, and something inside that feels bad, you might say. So we had, I'm angry, and then we have something in me is angry. And because of saying something in me is angry, there's a space, there's curiosity, and I am turning toward this place that's angry. Now, the next step of focusing would be to describe the way it feels in my body. But, you know, actually that is also empathy, because sensing and describing how something simply is right now is an empathic move, instead of all the other things we could do instead, which is arguing with it, trying to get rid of it, being afraid of it, being afraid of what it means, and so on. So simply sensing and describing is actually an empathic move toward how it is feeling. The
So what I'm
next,
hearing there is that
yeah,
there's like, you didn't use the word, but it's almost like a self-empathy, a feeling into oneself. And there's things that block maybe that feeling into oneself. And you'd mentioned a bunch, several of them, the blocking, or I can't remember which ones exactly you mentioned, but so that would that work in terms of a self-empathy, in terms of a word? Does that kind of fit, or?
yes, I saw on your website self-empathy was a term, and I would classify focusing as a self-empathy method.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that in my work of inner relationship focusing, we've put that self-empathy even more to the forefront. And so if you want to, I'll just show you the steps of focusing. The first is to pause and allow a body feeling to form, and then to turn toward it and describe it. And saying that that description is already an empathizing move. But then there's a deeper move, which is to sense how it's feeling from its point of view. And that's a very odd moment. I mean, I really surprise a lot of people when I teach that. I remember once a woman who said, "My throat is tight." And I said, "Well, so how does it feel?" And she said, "Well, it feels uncomfortable." And you can tell that when she says it feels uncomfortable, she's not empathizing with it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Cool.
I said to her, "Oh, okay, it feels uncomfortable to you. And would you be willing to sense how it itself is feeling?" And she was willing, and she paused, and she opened her eyes. She paused a moment and closed her eyes, and then opened her eyes with surprise and said, "Oh, it is scared." And so it is teachable, this move of empathy with the feelings we're having from their own point of view. And by the way, Gendlin calls these feelings felt sense. The felt sense is the forming of the body's felt experiencing at this moment. And he has an interesting story, a nice little story about what can happen and how things can really change when you give yourself this kind of empathy. He tells the story of a client that he had who had, she says, "I sabotage myself." She was a student in college. "I sabotage myself. When it comes time to turn in a paper, I pull back." All right. Now, you can imagine many conversations that could evolve from there, that a therapist and a client would discuss, better study strategies, or what were the childhood sources of this. But what he said instead was, maybe you can sense the pullback. The pullback, it's a funny way of talking, in order to make it something that can be sensed. And so then she was silent. And that's an odd thing to happen in therapy too, that people wouldn't just talk about their problems. She said, "Okay, yes, I feel it." And then she was silent. And she opened her eyes and she said, here's my notes here, "This is an all good place that would rather be hidden than come out and be tromped on." And the point is that by empathizing with the place in her that had not been handing in papers, it took a step. Everyone, including her, thought that was some kind of the bad guy, the saboteur inside.
Mm-hmm.
And by pausing and empathizing with its point of view, she was able to sense something completely surprising, completely different. It changed her whole body constellation. It's not just a new information. It's something new in the whole way the issue is held. She'll now live differently. Yeah, exactly. So this inner empathy leads to really new possibilities for life. What we understand about interpersonal relationships is that when someone is heard, they relax, and then a new state emerges. And the same is true inwardly, is that when something inside us is heard, it no longer needs to feel the same way. And so there's what I tell my students is If you're still feeling the feeling, there must be something about it that it feels has not been heard yet. And sure enough, if you go back, what hasn't been heard yet, something will emerge. And when what really needed to be heard comes, there is a physiological response, a relaxing, a relief, a deeper breath, and it doesn't return.
So I have another video. I don't know if I want to take the, I think I will show it. It's also her being interviewed by the same guy, but in it she describes a story, and that's the part I want you to see, of a child in a daycare center that is just going ballistic. And there's one sentence that one of the caregivers gives her that just completely settles her. All of this is from it's an hour-long interview. And it took 11 minutes from the that I showed you just now, and this is another segment that's 6 minutes long.
Empathy can move mountains. Empathy can change the world. And it changes situations when we bring empathy in. So I had a story that moved me very much that I heard recently, where a woman came into a children's section of a hospital, and a child was having absolute emotional meltdown. She'd been told she couldn't go home today. And she's screaming, "I want to go home, I want to go home." And all the kind people around her, the aides, the nurses, and so on, her mother, are offering her, here's what you can do instead.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a doll, here's a toy. And she's screaming, "I want to go home." So the woman walks in and kneels down to the child's level and says, "Sweetie, you want to go home." And the child stops screaming. Just, there's silence in the room, and her attention shifts. Without even saying another word, now she's interested in the toys and the dolls and so on. And so what we see happening over and over again is that people hold fixed positions until their position is heard, and then there's a shift. And if we look at the world today, what makes us frustrated, sad, and angry about so many of the things that are going on is people holding fixed positions and unable to hear each other. And even the people that we believe in, who we think ought to be the ones who are prevailing, are also holding fixed positions and not hearing or being heard. And so the power of empathy to open a space where something new can happen is enormously impressive. And yes, in my 44 years now of working with focusing and listening, I've seen it over and over and over again.
So this interview happened years ago. I think it was even before Trump. So it's interesting to apply what you just said to ourselves, because we're all doing this. The same. We have fixed positions, and whether they're right or wrong is not relevant to the emotional engagement that happens when somebody has another fixed position. And I just love what she said. I loved it so much. I think I wrote it down. People hold positions until their position is heard. Because that's because if you don't get to the point where you hear their position, it'll just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. When they feel heard, they don't have to say it again because you've heard it. They have to be heard.
There were groups of Arabs and Israelis that did the same thing. They got involved in discussion. Arabs and Israelis.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Who met on a regular basis and came to understand each other and became friends. Whether or not they changed positions, I don't remember, but they certainly had empathy. What's that?
Yeah.
I remember every elected official.
Yeah.
And there's a similar story about a group that was formed that's half right-to-lifers and half more liberal, and put them together just to get and structured in a way that they really did get to know each other. And by the end, their positions hadn't changed. But what they said about each other was that they experienced love for the other people. They cared about the other people, even though they were on opposite sides of the argument. And they understood better where the other positions came from, even though the positions might not have changed. So it wasn't any longer that person is the problem or these people are the problem. Is ideology. Because that's what you think. When I go to a longer retreat, like a 5 or 7 day retreat, and at the retreat you reach this place where it's so simple. This is so simple. So now I'm going to have this forever, and then as soon as you get out or something happens, and it just exactly. But there are kind of pathways that are developed that allow that to happen more often. But to expect that it's going to be a permanent state is a recipe for anxiety. Well, and it's another layer of empathy that we're learning. So because we know too much, so we find ourselves being critical of ourselves. Not only we're critical of ourselves, we get critical about the criticalness. Say, well, I shouldn't be like that. I should be far enough along my own development. So yeah. Yeah, and so it's helpful to have a level at which you say, where you don't have the judgment on top of judgment, just it is, and that's because we have this expectation we're supposed to be perfect people and not have that ever happen. And that's what I'd written down that other things that she says, this all good place. That's right. Well, she said, wasn't that beautiful how she said it? I wrote that down. She says, there's this all good place that couldn't come out for fear it would be trumped on.
Well, I wanted to know what the behavioral outcome was still.
Oh, with that child?
The point, but so the child identifies the all good place and doesn't want to turn in the paper.
Oh, this about the student who can't write the paper.
Yeah. Because she doesn't want it to be trumped on, and that makes sense. So the protection would be turn it in.
To not turn it in.
If she identifies
the
reason why. So that was the layer I was.
Yeah, it isn't kind of it's not a logical progression. It is just like with that little child. The child wanted to go home, and even when the child knew she wasn't going to go home, but just being heard was enough. And with the paper, is just being able to address that came from a good place, to hear what was going on, that was enough. Is what keeps banging at our inner. But maybe there was less anxiety about all of it. I used to be to get upset with myself that I always wait till the last minute to do stuff, because I'm one of these people. The night before an exam, I'd be studying and writing papers till 2 or 3 in the morning. I actually haven't got to the point where because this changed yesterday, so I am still doing things the last minute, but there's less beating myself up about it. I know that's part of my own process. I know that, but it does help. I have noticed it does help to start the process way before. Think about what I'm going to be doing, and even though it might change, that allows for some incubation to happen. So when that last spurt. So we're going to do a meditation, but first I wanted to just pose something to you. I just ask you to take a minute in the context of what we've been talking about. Just take a moment to notice how you are right now, what you're feeling right now, what you're sensing right now. If you were going to give it a label, what would it be? Bored, frustrated, happy, comfortable, relaxed, impatient, happy. Just get a sense of what that is for you. So a word or a phrase.
You want us to articulate it?
No, just experience it. Just notice it, whatever that is, and then maybe, and see how it feels to you if you say, "I am," whatever it is you've noticed. I am bored, or I am restless, or I am anxious, or I am ready for the next thing that's going to happen that Dave hasn't done yet. Just notice what's there, and you say, "I am," and now shift that, change the language, and say, "Something in me," or even better, say, "I'm noticing something in me that feels this way. I'm noticing something in me that's feeling this way." Just seeing what that's like, to just change the language of it. And you're kind of just saying hello to it. You're not requiring that it change. If it's a good state, maybe you want it to stay that way. If it's something's uncomfortable, you want to change it. You're just noticing it. Something in me is feeling this way. And we don't have to go farther with this, but I'm just curious what you noticed when you did that shift from I am to something in me. What did you notice? Anyone? Better? More true? More true. Yeah, because in fact you aren't that, but you hold that, and there's an honoring of that state. It's not pushing it away. It's like Pete was saying before. It's both having perspective, but also paying attention to it. Yeah, but more true. I like that. And what for others? What did you notice? Deeper. Yeah, curious. And that's what focusing is about, and that's why it's a much longer explanation and practice than we can do in one evening. And in the notes that you'll get from this session, I'll give you some references. One of them is called "Getting Bigger Than What's Bugging You." If you go to Focusing Resources, is the name of Anne's website, and on that there's a link to Getting Bigger Than What's Bugging You. It's a free 5-week course that is about taking yourself through that process of paying attention in that way, and like you say, Terry, going further than just something in me. So it can be an exploration where something does happen if you pay attention that way. Yeah, and there's hundreds of types of meditation. It's just like there's hundreds of types of sports. There's tennis and there's volleyball and there's javelin throwing. They're all very different, but they're all physical in their sports. Yeah. So let's do a meditation, and just making yourself comfortable. And we're just paying attention to how your body is, how your feet are making contact with the floor or the couch, the cushion. Sensing the contact you're making with what you're sitting on and how that's supporting you. And feeling that support in terms of pressure and contact and warmth or coolness. Noticing how your arms are resting in your lap or however they're positioned. And when you're ready, paying attention to breath, to the actual physical motion of breath, whether you feel it in your belly or your chest or your throat or your nostrils. It's one place where you can sense the movement of breath. And when your mind wanders, which it will, to somewhere else, that's fine. It's all part of the meditation, just noticing that's happened and coming back gently but firmly to breath. And when those moments happen where your attention wanders somewhere else, seeing if you can make it into a little bit longer, rather than just a touch and go where you notice it and you come back to breath. Seeing if you stay with it just for a little bit. So if you're remembering something that happened in the past, or noticing a sound that's happening in the room, or thinking about something that's happening in your life, or noticing that you're concerned about something that's going on, or wondering where this process itself is going, just noticing that, and noticing what your own sense of that is. How are you with that? Maybe there's some self-criticalness about I should be able to stay with breath for longer than that and not have my mind wander all over the place. Or it could just be a wanting to just drift and go somewhere else. Or something that's been concerning you, and staying with it just long enough to notice it. Notice that sense of it, how it feels in your body to notice that. And when you feel like you've made contact with that enough, so you, in a way, as Zen Weiser Cornell would say, you're saying hello to that sense, or that feeling, or that thought. Not making it go away, not requiring that it change, just noticing, just hello, that's there. And when you feel like you've made contact with that, if you like, you can come back to breath. Use that as the home base. Sensations of breathing. And seeing if you can allow that whole process of there's a noticing of the breath, you're staying with breath for a moment, and mind wanders somewhere else, in touch with something else that's going on in your life or some other thought, and recognizing that, and letting it all be continuous and seamless, as it were, And when you're ready, coming back to breath. You don't have to force yourself back to breath. Or it could be to sound. You could listen to the sounds in the room. Or sensations in your body. And if you find yourself lost in something, it's coming back to breath. Or to sound, or to sensations in body. There's actually no wrong place to bring your attention. You could even let your attention go where it goes. So if a sound comes in, you can pay attention to the sound for a moment. Just noticing this vibration and sound, not necessarily any meaning to it, just the sensations of hearing. Or it could be body sensation you're noticing. Your body's making contact with the couch or the floor. Your arms in your lap. Or you could even watch the movement of thought, how a thought comes and how it goes. Anything that comes into awareness can be an object of meditation. This type of practice is called choiceless awareness, where whatever comes into awareness, you can pay attention to it for a moment or longer, it's fine. And then something else may come into your attention. You pay attention to that for a little while. And then something else, or you can stay with one thing. And seeing if through all of it you can maintain the same quality of awareness, although the object of your awareness is changing. The next 6 or 7 minutes will be silent, and you can continue with this choiceless awareness kind of meditation, or make it a breath meditation, or however you like to spend the time you have with yourself the next 7 minutes.